first of all, congrats on the book.
Well, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun to do and a lot of great memories.
I can imagine. I wanted to ask you this because you've been in the sports journalism world for a while, and I'm always surprised that, especially 1972, still holds so much for so many people. And I'm curious if we're seeing that memory of 1972 dwindle for some of the, I guess, younger demographic of sports fans or hockey fans, or is there still reverence for that team even though so many people were not around?
I think there's still reverence, but just giving age dynamic, it's understandable that some of the luster would come off from the standpoint of a lot of us are getting older. A lot of the players are moving on.
Yeah.
There's not as many people to be out there talking about the series and explain to those who weren't around or haven't taken the time to study it, just the impact and the significance and the magnitude of it from a hockey perspective, from a cultural perspective. It touched on so many levels. And, as things evolve, you get, 72 was to one generation, then all of a sudden 87 comes along.
Yeah.
And that's to another generation. And 2010 with Sid and the Golden Goal is to another generation. So we've been fortunate that we've had a lot of generational hockey moments, those where were you moments.
Yeah.
But 72 should always be special because it was the first and there'll never be another like it.
Yeah. And there was also, you talk about the Golden Goal. I was unfortunately not able, even though it's not too many years ago, was unable to watch that, although my wife did and my family did, because I was in the hospital under the knife getting my liver operated on. And I saw photos that my wife shared with me of them walking up and down the streets, high-fiving everybody after the goal, and I go, I missed it. Because I remember watching all the other hockey games in the hospital except for that one. But yeah, that's a memory that I'll have to remember, through stories. And maybe years from now, somebody will write a book, another book about that time. But 72 is also important because of the politics surrounding everything, right? You mentioned two other series. It didn't seem to have that extra something special, je ne sais quoi, that 72 had.
No, as I say, it was the first. It was the first time our best players played their best players. For years, we'd always only been able to send our best amateur players over to World Championships and Olympics to play, all the world. But the Soviets were dominating for years. They called themselves amateurs, but they weren't. They're all enlisted by and large in the Army, and their posting was to the hockey rink, and they trained year round, and they got results because of it. And there was great frustration on our end because of that. And they actually wanted this series too, because they wanted to test themselves on another level and show the world how good they were. But yeah, the politics of the day, the Cold War was going on. It was, it was capitalism versus communism.
Yeah.
It was the West versus the East. It was us versus them. And, we didn't know much about the Soviets back then, us being just the ordinary person, because, you didn't have the World Web. You didn't have, network news the way it is today and social media the way it is today. They were a black and white image, a scary black and white image on the nightly news, because it was this communist country behind the Iron Curtain playing games with the world, and they scared us, and they scared us for good reason on the political level. So we didn't know that much about them other than to fear them. And so you had that undercurrent throughout the series as well, especially when it wasn't the laugher that everybody thought, when it became more dramatic and it became very personal. And it wasn't just bragging rights about two hockey teams. It was bragging rights about two countries. And in the world then, and I'm not sure applies as much now. But back in the world then, especially because of that great divide between, the Eastern Bloc countries and the communism and all that, is when you had big events like an Olympics or a World Championships, or this, that, if you could put an athlete out there and put him on a podium and put a gold medal around them while you're celebrating a great athlete, but it was countries viewed as that was a PR vehicle for them to tell the world, look how good we are. Our athletes are better. Our way of life is better. Our politics is better. All of that. I mean, even in the back in '72, as the series was going on, the world was transfixed on, of all things, a chess match, a world chess match, because it was between an American, Bobby Fischer, and a Soviet, Boris Spassky, two grandmasters. Who pays attention to chess other than people who are really involved in chess? But casual people were paying attention to the chess results every day, or to the match results every day, because it was us versus them. So that was the mindset of the day. And I don't know that you can necessarily reproduce that now.
Yeah, I'm curious, Scott, if you've ever, I always think of this, and I don't know whether you've thought of it over or maybe written about it in your time as a sports journalist, but the role that nationalism plays in sports everywhere, from the national anthem at the beginning of a baseball game or a hockey game or a basketball game, to the national anthem at the Olympics, to the crowd cheering for their country. Even if it's, for example, an MMA bout between somebody from the U.S. and somebody from Brazil, cheering USA, USA. It's fascinating that you talked about the chess tournament. Why do we wrap ourselves up in flags for all of these sporting competitions, do you figure?
I guess you take pride in your country. I mean, if you're happy living in Canada, you take pride in your country, and you want it to be viewed as the best. And I guess there is still, when you put it that way, still that similar type of sentiment that, well, if we go and win the gold medal at the Olympics, we're showing the world how good Canada is, not just our hockey players, but our country. So I guess that sentiment does still exist. I don't think it has quite the same passion because of the politics of the day, and what we didn't know about other people back then. We know so much more now. But I mean, it's funny because you say it. I often say with the World Junior Tournament, Canadians get all excited over Christmas and the New Year's. Massive television audiences and all the rest of it. And yet, once it stops, those same people wouldn't walk across the street to go into a junior rink to watch a game. They should.
Oh, you're so right.
They wouldn't do it. They don't do it. But you put that Canadian flag on the front of that sweater, and then everything changes. So it's all
our kids, versus your kids. Yeah, you're so true. That's so true. I'm wondering, you talked a little bit earlier about, we thought it was going to be a cakewalk. I'm wondering if we would remember 1972 differently if on either side it was a sweep. Would it have been as special to Canadians if there was a sweep, or would it still be special if, for example, the Soviets beat us in the tournament? And I say us, like I played.
I don't think Canadians would remember it quite as passionately as we have over the years, because nobody likes to remember losses. Especially in a series that you were expected to win, and expected to win easily, handily. So it wouldn't have quite the same impact. And Ken Dryden talks about it in the book, is that going into that series in the eyes of so many people, not necessarily the players, but some, but in the eyes of so many players, the series was supposed to be great because it was going to show off the greatness of the Canadian hockey players and how dominant they could be, and show the world that hockey is our game. And the Soviets are number two, and a distant number two when the series is over. Well, obviously it didn't unfold that way, but it became great for other reasons, because of the drama that was involved because of how the games themselves unfolded, because of the comeback, because of the Henderson goal, because of how the game has changed forever because of that series. So it became great. It stayed great, but a different kind of great. And that's, we remember it for a lot of things that came out of that series, and ultimately winning it is the one thing that makes sure it never goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I had thought I was doing a little bit of research while reading this book, and I had thought, because I know there was conversation about Henderson going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. He's in a number of Hall of Fames. He's been commemorated and remembered, but he's not in the Hockey Hall of Fame because of his sort of career rather than, the moment. And many people don't know he didn't just score that one goal. Wasn't it 3 games in a row that he scored the winning goal? I know Henderson seems to, at least publicly, not really mind. But what are your thoughts around Paul Henderson being in the Hockey Hall of Fame?
I think he should be in. I know, as you mentioned, people talk about the greater body of work and all that. I still think he was a very good NHL and WHA player. You don't get named to a roster and play all 8 games in a series like that, of that magnitude, with the stars that were selected for that roster. You don't get there unless you're a really good player yourself. And then to perform the way he did on that stage with the emotions and the pressures that were involved is just staggering. And to do it through injury, to have a concussion in the 5th game and beg the coaches to let you go back in. And then, as you mentioned, score 3. If they'd not blown the 5th game, he would have scored the winning goal in the final 4 games, the game-winning goal. So, I mean, it was a staggering performance. And so I think he deserves to be in. And we've put some of the Soviet players in, like Tretiak and Yakushev, and deservedly so.
Yeah.
But how do we measure their greatness when we only had limited series of them playing our best? And when they played internationally, we weren't sending our best for the longest while. And, some of the other countries didn't measure up to what the ability of that team was. And yet they're in. And, I was always say, and others say, the guy who let in the 3 goals is in the Hall of Fame. The guy who scored them isn't. And,
wow.
It's, but I think he and others from the Soviets should be in and recognized for all that they accomplished in their careers, but you're measuring them with a different stick too. So that's why I think, Paul deserves to be in.
Nice. One person who is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, who didn't play in the series, but was the voice of the series for so many Canadians, is Foster Hewitt. I have an affinity for, I'm a big baseball fan. So in Toronto, Tom and Jerry, to me for so many years, they both were the voice of summer. I would hear their voice, and whether it was a cloudy day like today or not, I would feel warm inside. It was like, finally, winter is over and summer is here. Tell me about, I don't remember Foster Hewitt. I wasn't born when the series happened, but tell me about the importance, if you can, of Foster Hewitt, of his voice, and of the color that he brought to the series for so many Canadians.
Well, I mean, he was the voice of hockey in English Canada from the beginning, from when broadcasting started. He shoots, he scores. That's him. Foster Hewitt. And so he was convinced to come out of retirement to call this series because people felt the magnitude of the series, Canada, first time, all the rest of it, that Foster was the guy who deserved to be the voice. And Bob Cole, who was working for CBC Radio at the time, he was the voice on radio in English Canada. So 2 Hall of Famers right there. And back then, of course, she didn't have all the broadcasts that we have today. So there weren't a lot of play-by-play voices that you would call on. And there weren't, there was only 2 Canadian teams. So it wasn't like you were had all these cities to look at and say, well, he's been calling games here for years and years. So it was a smaller pool, and Foster, just given the history, and this was going to be history in the making, made sense. And he struggled with a few names at times, but I can only imagine how tough it would be when you've not seen Soviet names before and you have to start figuring them out. And you didn't have names on the back in those days either. So, it was a steep learning curve, and he wasn't a kid, but he made a great call. He and Brian Conacher, who did the color, they were outstanding to listen to, and Bob was great on the radio. And it was, and I know I tell the story that Bob became very good friends with the Soviet coaching staff, and but he spent time with the interpreter that was with the team in the days leading up, and studied every name and would rehearse them, the pronunciation with the Soviets to make sure he was getting them right. And then he shared his list of names and the phonetics spellings with Foster, so that who was his idol and who gave him a start in the business, so he could share with him the names and make sure he got them right.
Yeah. What would the NHL look like today? Would it be the same? Would we have players from all over the world? Would we have the Russian superstars that we've seen over the number of years? Or would the NHL be a different league without 1972? What do you think?
I think we probably would have, the Europeans and the Russians. It might have taken longer than it did for it to happen because of the exposure and the awareness that series created. I mean, part of what, for years there was, players had to defect out of their country, get smuggled out of their country to come over to play in North America. But when the Iron Curtain fell and the Soviet Union turned into Russia, then that all changed and the doors opened, and there was much more, of an embracing of allowing their players to come over and play in the NHL. So I guess, given the politics of the day, it would have happened, but it happened in large part because it started out of that 72 series. A whole different mindset was created. What did
the Summit series mean to you at the time?
Well, I was just about going to turn 14, was a hockey crazy kid. I think we had a mindset at the time as kids that, because in the world, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't know a lot about the Soviets other than that they were that scary image on the newsreels, and that they were the bad guys in the world. We were the good guys and they were the bad guys in the world. And this was good versus evil. And, again, and it's the pride in who we are and our players and wanting to be the best, and the thought of losing to the dreaded evil empire.
Yeah.
And I'm not being sarcastic. That's how you felt. That
sure.
You just couldn't lose to these guys. That's wrong. Our world won't be a good place anymore if that happens, where we can't lose anything to these guys because of what they represented on a political stage.
That's so true. And I'm wondering, Scott, does it mean anything different to you today after all these years?
Well, I guess we don't look at the world in quite the same prism, although what's happening in Russia now, the evil empire is back. I guess I look at it as still, you don't have that same emotion that you would have had back in the day, but I have a greater appreciation for having talked to all the players and coaches and whatnot, of the emotion and the pressure they were under and what they were going through at the time, to make sure we were all happy when it was all said and done.
Nice. Scott Morrison, this has been a wonderful chat. The book is really great. I love how it's separated on a game-by-game basis. It's a great book for anybody who remembers that time, but as well for any hockey fan or sports fan out there. I think it's a wonderful book just to read, and it's as if you're there and you're experiencing it. So just a wonderful book. 1972, the series that changed hockey forever. My guest has been Scott Morrison. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.